Hi, I'm Tricky Pixie with the Windy City Rollers, and welcome to Roller Derby Rules Class 5. Last time we went over contact penalties, and today we will be going over passing and scoring. So we will be attempting to answer the following questions. What is a no earned pass? What is superior position? What is a not on the track point? And how does scoring work? Track cuts and illegal positioning will be moved to the next video. So as always, you can follow along at rules.wftda.com, and let's get to it. So starting with 2.5 passing. Passing, scoring, and having position on someone is all based on hip placement. Whoever's hips are more in the counterclockwise or derby direction is ahead of someone else. And whoever's hips are more in the clockwise direction is behind someone else. When we say hips, we mean the center point of the hips. To pass someone means your hips go from behind to ahead of them in derby direction. Passing someone also means you have superior position on them. This is why jammers often transition backwards to attempt to pass with the hips. For jammers, there's also a distinction between passing and earning a pass. Earning a pass means you pass someone while meeting certain requirements. To earn a pass, a jammer must be wearing the star, be upright and inbounds, and pass another skater. Or if the jammer is inbounds and wearing the star but down, they also earn the pass if a skater skates clockwise behind the jammer. Earning passes matters because a jammer must earn a pass on all 8 blockers in order to get lead on their first trip through the pack. And to score, jammers must earn passes. If passing while airborne, a skater is considered inbounds if they take off and land inbounds, and they are considered upright as long as the first contact down is with a skate. This last rule is important for apex jumps and described by the casebook. Because you must earn a pass to get a blocker's point, this means that on a scoring pass, as long as you land inbounds with one skate down, you can get the point on the opposing blocker whose hips you passed, even if your second foot falls out of bounds or you fall out of bounds after that first foot touched down inbounds. A situation where a jammer might not earn a pass on someone is the following. The jammer and another skater both go out of bounds. The jammer passes them while out of bounds, and the jammer re-enters the track in front of that skater. Because the jammer was not in bounds when they passed the skater, they did not earn the pass. The referee will then signal no earned pass. If you do not earn a pass on all 8 blockers, you are not able to get lead jammer status. You also cannot score on someone if you do not earn a pass on them. If there are blockers in the penalty box, they are not exempt from being considered passed. Skaters who are not on the track are considered passed once the jammer passes any opposing blocker. Examples of not on the track include being in the penalty box, going to the penalty box, leaving gameplay to fix equipment, any blockers not fielded for the jam, and blockers returning from the penalty box but still behind the jammer. So if the jammer passes an opposing blocker, they will also earn a pass on all blockers who are not on the track. If the blocker is still on the track while they are going to the box, then the jammer can still pass them while they're on the track to earn that pass. Section 3, scoring. Points are grouped by trips. Jammers begin each jam on trip 1, and jammers do not score on trip 1. This is called the initial pass. On all subsequent trips through the pack, the jammer is on a scoring trip, and they can score up to 4 points per trip, 1 per opposing blocker that they pass. Points are awarded at the end of the trip, and a trip ends when the jam ends or when the jammer exits the engagement zone. Let's go over the basics. Jammers start on trip 1. Once the jammers exit the engagement zone, trip 1 is complete and they are now on trip 2. Trip 2 is a scoring trip, and they begin scoring points, in this case passing all opposing blockers. They exit the engagement zone, they are awarded 4 points for the jam, and now they are on trip 3. But trips are not how many times you go around the track, but how many times you pass through the engagement zone. And again, they got 4 points and are now on trip 4, and so on. Once you complete a trip, you cannot return to that trip to try to earn passes, which would get you points or get you lead. The red jammer passes that blocker while out of bounds, so this is a no earned pass. They re-enter, and they are still in the engagement zone. So this is a critical moment where if the jammer were to skate clockwise they are allowed to earn that pass by passing this blocker while they are in bounds, and then they would be awarded a lead. And then they can exit the engagement zone to complete trip 1. However, if instead, when they are hit out and get a no earned pass, they exit the engagement zone immediately, it is now too late to try to get lead. Their opportunity has passed. They cannot go back and try to earn that pass. They can re-enter trip 1, but it will not affect any points or passes. So you might see this in what we call eating the baby situations, where one jammer hits the other one out and will recycle them an entire lap. So jammers who were starting on trip 1 now go all the way back, re-enter the engagement zone from the front, and they are now on trip 0. Worst case scenario, they get stopped by the opposing team, so then they have to fight through to complete trip 0, and then also fight through to complete trip 1, and then they can start scoring on trip 2. So you want to avoid that situation. But you're only allowed to fall behind up to 1 trip, so you can never go to trip -1. So that's good news. Now you might be wondering, if you have to exit the engagement zone, what happens if there is no pack? So in that situation, it's similar to a lot of other no packs situations where basically the pack was here, there's no pack, the jammer still has to exit where the engagement zone was from the last defined pack in order to complete their trip. Now we've already established that when a jammer earns a pass on an opponent, they also earn a pass on all opponents who were considered not on the track. Okay, so in this situation, Victoria's jammer in blue is on a scoring trip, and Denver right here has 2 blockers on the track. One blocker is returning to the track, and the other one is off screen, is sitting in the penalty box. So in this situation, once the blue jammer has passed an opposing blocker to score, in this case they've passed 2, they also get a point for the blocker in the box and the blocker returning from the track, meaning that she was awarded 4 points for that trip. So let me show a couple more examples of how not on the track points work. So in this case, the red jammer gets lead, is now on trip 2, scoring trip. This blocker re-enters from the box behind the jammer. So the jammer has not yet passed anybody on this trip. So in this case, if the jammer does pass a blue blocker, they also get the pivot's point because they are returning from the track, returning from the box. So they have not yet established position in front of the jammer. However, if the jammer does not pass anyone before the pivot skates in front of the jammer, they have now established their position in front of the jammer, and the jammer must pass the pivot in order to get the pivot's point. And one more example, in this case, the blue jammer will get out as lead, is around to score, gets 1 pass on an opposing blocker. Let's say they reform, so they've only scored on red 1 in this example. This jammer is stuck, is not able to pass anyone else, and then red 2 gets a penalty and goes to the box. So because blue is already past red blocker 1, they will get this point even though the penalty happened after they passed red blocker 1. So if blue jammer were to call off the jam, they would be awarded 2 points in this example. Now on to scoring avoidance, which can be summarized as you cannot avoid being scored on unless you block the jammer from passing you. There's pretty much no way to do it. If the jammer is, inbounds, upright, wearing the star, and they make it through the pack, they are going to get those 4 points. There are a few situations where blockers are considered unable to be passed, such as a blocker who's in front of the engagement zone, so when the jammer exits the engagement zone, they never got a chance to pass that blocker, you just get their point. If the blocker is ahead of the engagement zone, when the jam ends, same thing, the jammer gets their point. If there are no opposing blockers on the track and the jammer completes a trip, could not pass anybody, that shouldn't happen because there should be always an opposing blocker on the track, but things happen. There might be an equipment issue or an injury. then the jammer would get those 4 points if they make a clean pass through where the engagement zone should be and there was no one there. Jammers unable to score will earn not on the track points once they're able to score again. What this looks like is the jammer gets lead, comes around, is on a scoring trip, scores 1 point on an opposing blocker. At this point, the jammer gets a penalty and goes to the penalty box. If an opposing blocker that was not already scored on then goes to the penalty box, if the jammer were still on the track, they would get the red pivot's point as a not on the track point. However, because the jammer is unable to score because they are in the penalty box, then they do not get that not on the track point. But they do get that point once they return to the track and they are, quote, able to score again. Same thing applies to taking the star off. So if you score on one person, then you get stuck. You take the star off, maybe looking for a pivot. Another blocker on the other team goes to the box. If you put that star back on, you will get that. They're not on the track point, but if you keep it off, you can't be scoring. You need the star on to score. The casebook does go over a few helpful things. We mentioned apex jumps. The rulebook does say, when you lap an opposing blocker, then that's when you score their point. They pretty much don't really follow that. It's all according to trips. You obviously wouldn't have 2 laps on an opposing jammer who's ahead of you in laps, but if they pass the star, you're still going to get their point if you pass them. And then star passes, if you had already passed the pivot and then the pivot takes the star and runs off, you don't have to pass the jammer turn blocker. You already got that person or position's point, so to speak. This one reiterates that lapping isn't really followed. Passes prior to the initial trip do not count toward lapping blockers. Alright, going to penalized jammers. So penalized jammers are considered to be off the track, and penalized jammers cannot earn passes. Penalized jammers return to their current trip upon legal re-entry. Any points scored on that trip before the penalty are retained. So if the jammer scores 3 points, goes to the box, returns, they still have those 3 points in the bank. Once they complete their trip, those points are awarded. And this is something I asked my league's officials about, and they gave clarity that, for example, the red jammer is lead. They have, let's say, 4 points here. They earned those 4 points, and then they commit a penalty, let's say a forearm, but the refs maybe are reading their number, so it takes a second. The jammer exits the engagement zone, and then the penalty is called. So because the penalty happened back here on trip 2, the jammer will, even though they're here, they will have to go serve their penalty, and when they return, they will still be on trip 2, because they never should have been able to complete that trip. They should have just gone right to the box. So where the penalty happens, if it's in trip 2 or in trip 3, does matter. So you have to return to the track on the trip you left. 3.5 Errors in scoring and score reporting. The official score is the one that's visible to spectators, officials, and teams. So if there's an error with the score, that is the score that you believe there to be an error with. There is not a secret correct score by the scorekeepers. The official one is the one visible to everyone. So it is important to note that there is a distinction between points awarded in error and points awarded correctly. So points can either be awarded correctly or incorrectly. Points that are awarded correctly cannot be altered. Points that are awarded incorrectly, whether points are awarded in error or denied in error, those points must be corrected before the end of the next jam. And if there's less than 2 minutes on the clock for the period, then they must be corrected before the next jam. In terms of official reviews, because you can't do an OR during a jam, you must use the OR before the next jam starts. The only example given is that if a jammer scores points and upon review was found to have committed a penalty 2 trips prior, they are still awarded those points because they were awarded correctly given the information at the time. Thank you so much for your time for watching Roller Derby Rules Class 5. That will conclude the video, and I look forward to seeing you next time as we cover my favorite topic, cutting the track.